Guy said, when my son got married and didn't invite me, I thought I had already reached the bottom of my pain. But 3 months later, a bill arrived in my mailbox. A bill for the wedding I hadn't attended, yet somehow I had paid for. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the venue had confused the accounts. But when I looked closer, the handwriting on the contract was familiar. My own signature, made months earlier, when I thought I was simply helping my son put down a deposit for a small family gathering. I had spent years trying to make up for the time I wasn't there for him. Working 2 jobs when he was a boy meant I missed birthdays, school plays, and soccer games. I told myself that helping him financially as an adult was my way of saying I was sorry. But standing in my kitchen, holding that bill, I realized the truth. I wasn't being forgiven. I was being used. That moment changed everything. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, boundaries, and the kind of man I wanted to be from that day forward. And as you'll see, the wedding bill was just the first thread in a web of secrets I never expected to uncover. Secrets that would turn my regret into resolve and my silence into action. I was 55 years old when I finally understood how heavy the past could be. My name is Thomas Miller, and for most of my son's childhood, I was little more than a photograph on the living room shelf. A man in a suit, smiling in a frame, somewhere between a memory and a stranger. When my wife, Emily, was alive, she carried the weight of raising our boy, Ethan. I wasn't absent because I didn't care. I was absent because I was working thousands of miles away on oil rigs and shipping contracts, chasing the kind of income I believed would secure our future. But birthdays came and went without me. School plays, soccer games, all the little moments that define a father's place in his child's life. I missed them. I told myself I'd make it right someday. When Emily passed away suddenly from a heart condition, Ethan was already in college. Grief has a way of stripping away pride, and in that emptiness I saw clearly what I'd missed. I came back to our hometown with a single purpose: to be there for my son, even if it was late. Ethan had changed. He was no longer the boy who used to send me drawings in the mail, begging me to come home. He was independent, guarded, polite in a way that felt formal. I knew he didn't owe me warmth, but I hoped time and effort might bridge the distance. So I started small. I offered to help with his tuition, covering the final semesters so he wouldn't drown in debt. I helped him buy his first car. Nothing flashy, just reliable enough to get him to job interviews. When he got his first apartment, I co-signed the lease. Every check I wrote wasn't just money. It was an apology, a quiet promise that I was here now. And I wasn't going anywhere, and for a while it seemed to work. Ethan began inviting me to occasional dinners. We'd watch football games together, laugh over old family stories. I'd catch glimpses of the boy I remembered, and it felt like maybe, just maybe, the years apart could be mended. One winter, he called me out of the blue and said, "Dad, I just wanted to say thanks for everything you've been doing." It was a simple sentence, but it meant more to me than he could have imagined. I hung up that night feeling like the years of distance were finally shrinking. There were still moments when I felt the wall between us. Sometimes, when I'd ask about his personal life, he'd give short answers, almost evasive. I figured it was normal. Adult sons don't always open up. Still, I stayed close, careful not to push too hard. When Ethan told me he was seeing someone seriously, a woman named Claire, I was genuinely happy for him. He sounded different when he spoke about her, lighter somehow. I met her briefly at a coffee shop once. She was polite, well-spoken, though I couldn't shake the feeling that her smiles were more rehearsed than warm. But I pushed the thought aside. The last thing I wanted was to be the judgmental father who ruined his son's happiness. Life moved in quiet rhythms after that. I worked part-time at a local logistics firm, stayed active in community events, and tried to be the kind of steady presence I had never been before. Every time I looked at Ethan, I told myself that the years of absence didn't have to define us. I believed, perhaps foolishly, that we were building something better. The guilt I carried from the past had begun to feel lighter, as if every shared meal, every laugh, every handshake at the end of a dinner was another brick removed from the wall between us. Looking back now, I realize I mistook politeness for closeness and gratitude for reconciliation. I thought our story was one of redemption, but the truth, which I was yet to discover, was that Ethan and I were not on the same page. The past wasn't gone. It was simply waiting for the right moment to remind me it had never left. Ethan's relationship with Claire marked a quiet shift I couldn't ignore. At first, I told myself it was natural. New relationships often change the rhythm of family life. But as the weeks turned into months, I began to notice that invitations to dinners became less frequent. Phone calls grew shorter, and casual visits seemed to vanish altogether. When we did meet, it was often at their suggestion, in public places, a quick lunch at a cafe, a coffee on the go. Claire was always polite, her voice even, her words carefully chosen. But her eyes rarely lingered on mine for long, and she often found subtle ways to steer conversations away from anything personal. It wasn't outright hostility, it was distance, a kind of soft barrier that was always there, even when she smiled. I told myself I was imagining it. After all, I was the father who had been absent for years. Maybe she just didn't know how to fit me into their lives yet. One evening, Ethan came by to pick up some boxes from my garage. I noticed they were labeled with things I didn't recognize: event supplies, decorations. "What's all this for?" I asked casually. "Oh, just Claire's work stuff," he replied quickly, avoiding my eyes. It wasn't unusual for him to be vague, but the way he shut the trunk, before I could glance inside, told me there was more to the story. I let it go. I had promised myself I wouldn't pry. The moments of distance became small patterns. When I called, sometimes he wouldn't pick up right away, returning the call hours later with an explanation that felt rehearsed. Text messages became shorter. "Busy. Talk later. All good. We'll catch up." I reminded myself that I was in no position to demand more. I had missed enough of his life to know that rebuilding trust wasn't a straight path. And so, I convinced myself it was just a phase, the natural space a grown son creates when building a life of his own. Still, there were signs that something deeper was shifting. At a family barbecue hosted by my sister, Ethan and Claire arrived late. Claire spent most of the afternoon speaking with a group of her friends who had been invited, while Ethan floated between conversations. Each time I tried to engage him in a longer talk, he was pulled away. After the event, My sister pulled me aside. Tom, I don't mean to pry, but is everything okay between you and Ethan? He seemed distant. I forced a smile. It's fine. He's just busy. But her question stayed with me. Then came the first real twist. Subtle, but sharp enough to make me take notice. One Saturday, I stopped by Ethan's apartment unannounced. I had something for him. An old watch that belonged to my father, something I thought he might appreciate. When I knocked, there was a long pause before he answered. Dad, this is a surprise, he said, stepping halfway into the doorway. I could see Claire in the background, hurriedly gathering papers from the coffee table. There was a look on her face, not anger, not exactly discomfort, but something closer to worry. I handed Ethan the watch. Just thought you'd like this. It was Grandpa's. He took it, smiled faintly, but didn't invite me in. Thanks, Dad. That means a lot. We're just in the middle of something right now, so maybe we can talk later? I nodded, trying not to let the sting show. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were conversations happening behind closed doors. Conversations I wasn't meant to hear. But I clung to the belief that this was just a stage. Relationships bring changes, and I had no desire to push myself where I wasn't wanted. I told myself that my patience would be rewarded, that time would turn the distance back into closeness. Looking back now, I realize that distance wasn't an accident. It was the first step in a slow, deliberate shift. But at the time, I didn't see it. I chose not to see it. It happened on an ordinary Saturday morning. I was having coffee at my kitchen table, scrolling absent-mindedly through my social media feed when I saw it. A photo of Ethan, standing in a perfectly tailored suit, his arm around Claire in a white dress. Behind them was an arch of flowers, sunlight spilling across a neatly arranged row of chairs. My breath caught. I thought maybe it was an engagement party, maybe a styled photo shoot. But as I scrolled, the truth became impossible to ignore. There were dozens of pictures. Ethan dancing, Claire laughing, guests raising champagne glasses. It wasn't an engagement party. It was their wedding. I stared at the screen, reading the comments that flooded each post. Beautiful ceremony. So happy for you both. Wishing you a lifetime of love. There was no trace of me anywhere in the photos, no sign I had even been in the same state when it happened. Because I wasn't. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was confusion. There had to be a mistake, a reason, an oversight. Maybe the ceremony had been a small private thing. Maybe they had planned to tell me after. My mind scrambled for explanations that would hurt less than the obvious one. As the hours passed, confusion gave way to something heavier. Not rage, not yet, but a familiar ache. The same one I felt years ago when I missed Ethan's milestones because of work. The same ache that whispered, "You're on the outside looking in again." That night, I didn't call him. I didn't text. I didn't want my emotions spilling out in ways I might regret. Instead, I waited. I told myself he would reach out. 3 days later, he did. A message appeared on my phone. "Dad, I know you probably saw the photos. I'm sorry you weren't there. It was a small ceremony, and we just wanted to keep things simple. Claire thought it might be less stressful without certain family tensions." I read it 3 times, each word cutting deeper. Family tensions. The phrase lingered like a shadow. I typed back slowly. "Ethan, I would have wanted to be there. You're my son. I don't care about stress. I care about you. He replied, I know, Dad. I just didn't want things to get complicated. I hope we can talk soon. And there it was, the smallest lifeline, a chance, however fragile, that this wasn't the end. I held on to that like a man gripping the edge of a cliff. I told myself that maybe this was just a misstep, a poor decision made under pressure. Maybe he regretted it. I didn't tell anyone in the family what had happened. When my sister called and asked if I'd seen the wedding pictures, I brushed it off. They wanted something small. I'm happy for them. I hid the truth because I didn't want anyone to see the fracture. In the quiet of my house, I convinced myself this was temporary. That time, patience, and understanding could close the gap again. I told myself that I had missed too much of his life already to risk losing what little I had now. Looking back, I see how blind I was. I thought his message was an opening, but it was really a closing door, delivered gently, politely, so I wouldn't hear the lock click into place. At the time, though, I believed there was still a path back. I didn't know that the wedding was just the beginning of a deeper betrayal. For weeks after the wedding photos, my house felt quieter than usual. It wasn't just the absence of voices or footsteps. It was the weight of an unspoken truth pressing into every corner. I didn't call Ethan, and he didn't call me, beyond the short apology he had sent. I told myself space was what we both needed. Time for the rawness to settle, for emotions to find their balance again. I threw myself into routines. Work at the logistics office, morning walks around the neighborhood, volunteering at the community center on Saturdays. I told anyone who asked that I was fine. And in the silence of my home, I kept rehearsing lines in my head, the calm, understanding things I would say when Ethan and I finally talked in person. Part of me believed the distance wasn't permanent. After all, he had reached out with that message. He had left the door cracked, and I wanted to believe he might open it further. I had been absent before. I had missed years of birthdays and school events. I wasn't in a position to demand anything. If my penance for those years was patience, then I would pay it. The first twist came when I least expected it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, weeks after the wedding, when my phone buzzed. Ethan's name lit up the screen. "Hey, Dad, just checking in. How's your health?" I stared at the message for a moment, my chest tightening. It was such a small thing, but it carried more weight than he could have imagined. He was thinking about me. He cared enough to ask. I typed back quickly, my hands almost trembling. "I'm doing well, son. Thanks for asking. How's everything with you and Claire?" His reply came after a pause. "We're good. Busy, but good. We should get together soon." Those words were like water in a drought. I told myself this was the moment I had been waiting for. The sign that time really was healing the wound. That maybe, just maybe, the wedding had been a misstep rather than a verdict. We exchanged a few more messages that week. Little things. Updates about work, about the weather, about the house he was looking at buying. I found myself smiling at my phone again, something I hadn't realized I'd missed. When he suggested lunch, I agreed immediately. We met at a small diner halfway between our homes. The conversation was light, even easy. He asked about my work, about my health. I told him about the new projects I was managing, how I'd been feeling better, now that I'd been more active. For a while, I let myself believe we were finding our way back to each other. I could see glimpses of the boy I remembered. The easy smile, the quick laugh. The wall between us felt thinner, and I wanted desperately to believe it would crumble. But even in that moment, there were signs I didn't see. Small hesitations, careful pivots in conversation. Looking back, I realized those lunches weren't just about reconnecting. They were reconnaissance, quiet steps toward something I hadn't yet understood. A week later, another message arrived. "Hey Dad, random question. Do you still have that credit card you used to help me out a while back?" It was a simple enough question. I had helped him before, putting a deposit down for his car, covering an unexpected repair bill. I thought nothing of it. "Yeah, I still have it. Why?" "Oh, nothing urgent, just wondering if it's still active. Claire and I are figuring out some things for an event, and I remembered you had helped before. But don't worry, we're just looking at options." At the time, it sounded harmless, generous even, that he was just checking and not outright asking. I told myself he was trying to handle things on his own now. I wanted to believe this was the responsible man I had raised. I didn't know it then, but that message wasn't random. It was the first move in something much larger. A careful opening step, couched in casual conversation, meant to see how much ground he could cross without raising alarms. At the diner that day, as we parted ways, he said, "It's really good to see you, Dad. We should do this more often." I drove home with a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt in months. I thought we had turned a corner. I thought patience had worked. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't walking toward reconciliation. I was being guided, gently, deliberately, toward a plan I couldn't yet see. 3 months passed after the lunch at the diner, and the fragile hope I had been holding on to seemed to be holding steady. Ethan and I were talking again, if only through occasional texts. I didn't press for more. I told myself rebuilding trust was a long process. It was a quiet Saturday morning when the envelope arrived. A plain white envelope from a billing department I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was junk mail, but my name was typed clearly on the front, and the return address belonged to a high-end events venue downtown. I opened it absent-mindedly, expecting some kind of promotion or generic advertisement. Instead, what slid out was a neatly folded invoice with the bold words, "Outstanding balance, 18th of $642,000. I stared at the figure, my heart thudding in my chest. My eyes scanned downward. The client name was Ethan Miller. The event listed, wedding reception. The payment method, my credit card number. For a long moment, I didn't move. The numbers didn't make sense. My card hadn't been used in months. I checked my wallet. It was still there. I grabbed my laptop and logged into my account. There it was. A charge from the venue, processed and cleared. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Some kind of clerical error. Ethan and I hadn't spoken about the wedding in any financial sense. Then, as my eyes roamed the invoice again, I saw it. Deposit paid in full on January 14th. January 14th. That date tugged at my memory. It was the same week Ethan had called me, stressed about some family dinner Claire was planning. He had mentioned the deposit then, a small amount to reserve a space. I remembered offering to help, thinking it was just a modest gesture. I had agreed to cover the deposit on my card, fully expecting to be reimbursed. Now, staring at the invoice, I realized the deposit was not for a small dinner at all. It was for the entire wedding reception. The pit in my stomach deepened. I pulled up my old emails, searching for the confirmation receipt from that time. And there it was. A vague email from the venue, thanking me for my payment and confirming the event. I hadn't read the fine print. I hadn't questioned the wording. Back then, I was too focused on the fact that Ethan had reached out. I had been so eager to be useful, to be included in some way, that I hadn't noticed what I was signing. The more I read, the colder I felt. The contract tied to the payment had my name listed as secondary payer, authorizing the use of my card for the full event balance. There was no mistake, no accidental billing. It had been arranged from the start. I sat back in my chair, my pulse pounding in my ears. My mind cycled through every recent interaction with Ethan. The sudden check-ins, the casual questions about my health, the friendly lunches. Had it all been leading to this? The realization hit harder than I expected. This wasn't just about the money. It was about trust. I had spent years trying to rebuild something fragile, and now I saw that I was being kept close, not for reconciliation, but for convenience. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over Ethan's name, but I didn't press call. Not yet. I knew if I spoke in that moment, my anger would overtake me. I needed clarity first. I called the venue instead. A polite woman answered, and I explained the situation. There was a pause on the other end. Yes, Mr. Miller, I see your name here as the payer for the event. The contract lists your son as the client. Everything appears in order. In order? I repeated, my voice tight. I wasn't even at the event. The woman hesitated. I understand, but the payment arrangements were finalized months ago. The deposit you provided secured the full booking. It's all covered in the terms you signed. I thanked her mechanically, my mind elsewhere. I barely remembered signing anything. A single page, perhaps, slid across a table during lunch, Ethan explaining it as a formality. I had been too focused on his voice, too relieved to have him reaching out to scrutinize the details. As I hung up, the truth settled heavily in my chest. This wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate. I opened the invoice again, my eyes locking on the total. Nearly $19,000. I thought about what that money represented. Not just the wedding, but my years of effort, my quiet hope that money could build a bridge where words had failed. Now I saw that bridge for what it was. One-sided. I had been walking toward him, but he had never been walking toward me. I folded the invoice and set it on the kitchen table. The anger hadn't hit yet. It would come later. For now, there was only a hollow kind of clarity. This wasn't just a bill. It was the truth, printed in black and white. The days following the discovery of the invoice were some of the darkest I'd experienced in a long time. It wasn't just the shock of the money, the nearly $19,000. It was the weight of what that number meant. I felt like a fool who had been blinded by hope and love only to be used and discarded. Each morning, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bill. It became a symbol, a bitter reminder of everything I thought I had rebuilt. Every dollar felt like a brick in the wall that Ethan and Claire had built between us. Walls that I was supposed to help fund, but never break through. I tried to tell myself it wasn't personal, that perhaps there was a misunderstanding. Maybe they were struggling financially and needed support. But the more I thought about it, the more the walls closed in around me. I realized this wasn't just financial help. This was exploitation wrapped in family ties. The loneliness was suffocating. I called a few close friends, but no words could ease the gnawing ache. One night, I found myself flipping through my old photo albums, pausing on pictures of Ethan as a boy, smiling, carefree, and full of life. How far away that boy felt now. How distant the father I had been. Then, just when I thought the pain couldn't get worse, I received a message that drove the final nail into the coffin of my hope. It was from Claire, a simple text. "Thank you so much for your generous support. We couldn't have done this without you. Looking forward to celebrating with you soon." At first, I felt a flicker of warmth. Maybe they were finally recognizing what I'd done. Maybe there was a sincere appreciation after all. But then, a sinking feeling settled over me as a friend forwarded me a message from a private group of the wedding's other contributors. The same message, word for word, had been sent to everyone who had helped fund the event. Friends, distant relatives, even some acquaintances. It wasn't personal. It was a copy-paste. No special mention of me, no acknowledgement of the years I'd spent trying to be there for Ethan. I felt the sting, not once, but twice. The first, from the betrayal of the money. The second, from the cold realization that I was just another name on a list, another check cleared without gratitude. That night, I sat in the dark, the phone in my hand feeling heavier than ever. The lines between love and manipulation blurred, leaving behind only the raw truth. I realized then that what I had thought was reconciliation was a facade, a performance designed to keep me quiet and compliant. I wasn't family to them. I was a resource, a wallet, not a father. The emotional crash hit hard, and I felt myself spiraling into a place I hadn't visited in years. Resentment, grief, and anger tangled together in a suffocating knot. Yet, amidst the storm, a spark ignited. The part of me that refused to be walked over. The part that knew boundaries had been crossed. I vowed then that I would no longer be silent. No longer the man who quietly gave while being forgotten. That night marked the end of my patience and the beginning of my resolve. The days following Claire's copied thank you message were a dark blur. I moved through my routine like a ghost, the weight of betrayal sitting heavy on my chest. I told myself to wait, to think things through before making any decisions. But then, the final insult arrived, and it hit like a punch to the gut. It was a message from Claire on a quiet Thursday evening. "Dad, we hate to ask, but the wedding costs ended up being much higher than we expected. There were some unexpected fees, and we could really use your help covering them. Could you send whatever you can? We appreciate everything you've done already." The message was polite, almost rehearsed, the kind of message you send when you expect no refusal. But what shocked me wasn't just the request. It was what came with it. Attached to the message were photos. The first was of a sprawling, sunlit apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The furniture looked new, expensive, and stylishly arranged. A far cry from the modest place I thought Ethan and Claire had. The second was a series of pictures from what looked like a luxury resort. White sand beaches, turquoise waters, a private cabana adorned with flowers. There was Claire and Ethan, smiling under the sun, cocktail glasses in hand, clearly on their honeymoon. I stared at the images, the realization crashing down. The money I had been quietly supporting, years of sacrifices, every check and every loan, had funded not only a lavish wedding, but this opulent lifestyle. I felt my throat tighten, a cold fury rising inside me. How could they ask for more? I whispered to myself. After everything I've given. It wasn't just the money. It was the complete disregard for me as a person, the way they had used my name and resources without a second thought, the way they had turned what should have been a family celebration into a transaction, and worse, expected me to keep footing the bill. I tried calling Ethan, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice shaking. "Ethan, we need to talk. Now." He called back hours later, his voice calm but distant. "Dad, I'm sorry you're upset. We didn't mean for it to feel like that." "Didn't mean for it to feel like that?" I repeated, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You're living in a penthouse, sipping cocktails on a beach, and now you want more money from me?" There was a pause. "We had to make some adjustments. Things came up. You know how it is," he said, his tone trying to sound casual. "It's not about adjustments," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "It's about respect. You could have told me. You could have asked. But instead, you sent pictures of your new life while asking me to pay for it." He sighed. "Dad, I don't want to fight. We're family. We'll figure this out." But I could hear the distance between us growing louder than any words. That call marked a breaking point. I knew then that my role in their lives wasn't the father I hoped to be, but a source of endless financial support. One that could be tapped whenever convenient and ignored when not. That night, I sat in the dark, replaying every moment of the past months. The dinners, the messages, the fake smiles, the wedding I wasn't invited to, paid for with my money, and the honeymoon pictures that felt like a slap in the face. Tears mixed with rage as I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about finally standing up for myself, because no amount of love should come at the cost of self-respect. That night, after the call with Ethan, I sat alone in my living room, the glow of the city outside my window, doing nothing to lighten the heaviness inside me. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept pulling me back through the years, through every moment I had stepped in to help Ethan financially. I thought about the first time I paid his rent when he was in college. His voice over the phone had been shaky, embarrassed. "Dad, I'm short this month. Just until next paycheck." I had wired the money without hesitation, telling myself that's what fathers do. Then there was the time his car broke down. It wasn't a small fix. The repair bill was almost as much as the car was worth, but I had covered it, convincing myself it was so he could get to work, build his independence. He promised to pay me back, but I never brought it up again. I didn't want to put strain on our already fragile relationship. The pattern had continued quietly. A security deposit for his first apartment with Claire, help with tuition for the last semester of his graduate program, a loan for furniture when they moved in together. Each time, I told myself this was an investment in his future. Each time, I waited for him to see these acts as gestures of love, bridges toward rebuilding the bond we had lost. But sitting there that night, I saw the truth. None of those moments had brought us closer. They had simply normalized the arrangement. I give, he takes. I help, he moves forward without looking back. I wasn't a father in his life. I was an account, a bank without interest, fees, or boundaries. The realization stung in a way that no wedding snub or copy-pasted thank you message could. This wasn't a one-time betrayal. This had been years in the making, quietly unfolding while I convinced myself that my money was a tool for reconciliation. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just at Ethan, but at myself. I had allowed this to happen. I had mistaken silence for gratitude, distance for respect. I had ignored the signs because acknowledging them meant admitting that my attempts at redemption had failed. I stood up, pacing my living room. My eyes landed on the framed photo of Ethan as a boy, sitting on the mantel. In the picture, he was smiling, missing a front tooth, his arm slung around my neck. That boy was gone. The man he'd become saw me as something useful, not someone valued. I poured myself a glass of water, trying to steady the surge of emotions. For years, I had told myself I was making up for the past. But now I understood. There was no making up for the years I had missed. Not with money, and certainly not with blind generosity. I set the glass down and sat again. This time, with a sense of clarity. This wasn't about cutting Ethan out of my life. It wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about respect, about establishing boundaries that should have been there all along. For the first time in years, I felt a shift, a quiet, steady resolve replacing the desperate need for approval. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew this much. I would no longer be the silent, willing provider. This was the beginning of the end of that version of me. The morning after my long night of reflection, I woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. The ache was still there, but it was no longer the helpless kind. It was sharper, more focused. I knew what needed to be done. For years, I had been a safety net for Ethan, ready to catch him at every stumble. But nets, I realized, have their limits. Mine was frayed, stretched to the breaking point. It was time to take it down. I sat at my kitchen table and made my decision. I would stop all financial support. No more silent transfers, no more temporary loans that were never repaid. If Ethan needed help in the future, it wouldn't come from my wallet. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation. That decision came with an odd sense of relief, like I had finally stepped out of a shadow I'd been living under for years. But as I began putting my finances in order, I stumbled across something that made my resolve even stronger. While sorting through old files in my home office, bank statements, old tax documents, and contracts, I came across a thick envelope marked mortgage documents. I had almost forgotten about it. Inside, I found the paperwork from when Ethan and Claire had purchased their home. I had co-signed the loan at the time, something I had agreed to without hesitation. But as I looked through the stack of papers now, I noticed something that stopped me cold. On one of the agreements, my name wasn't just listed as a co-signer. It was listed as the primary guarantor. My eyes scanned the page again, disbelief tightening my chest. This wasn't a minor clause. It meant that if Ethan defaulted on the loan, the responsibility would fall entirely on me. And based on the terms, there were already several missed payments. Small amounts, but enough to raise red flags. I leaned back in my chair, the document in my hands feeling heavier by the second. How many times had I agreed to something like this, trusting that Ethan would handle it responsibly? How many times had my trust been turned into a liability? And then it hit me. The house wasn't just a home for Ethan and Claire. It was leverage, a tool I could use if things escalated. I didn't want to hurt my son. That wasn't my goal. But I realized I needed to protect myself. For too long, I had operated from a place of guilt, making decisions to atone for my past absence. But guilt had turned into blind compliance, and blind compliance had put me in this position. I set the mortgage papers aside, neatly stacked but separate from the rest of the files. They were no longer just documents. They were evidence. Proof that I had gone above and beyond for Ethan, and that I had the means to hold him accountable if necessary. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted in my mind. I wasn't a desperate father trying to buy his son's affection anymore. I was a man who had choices, who had boundaries, who could stand his ground. That evening, I drafted an email to Ethan. I kept it calm, measured. Ethan, I've been reviewing my finances, and I need to make some changes moving forward. I won't be able to provide any more financial support. I hope you understand this decision. It's been a long time coming. We can still have a relationship, but it needs to be built on more than money. I'd like us to talk about this soon. I read it over twice before hitting send. It wasn't confrontational, but it was clear. Within an hour, I got a reply. Short, almost too casual. Okay, Dad. We'll figure things out. Let's talk later. No argument, no anger, but also no acknowledgement. It told me everything I needed to know. I closed my laptop and looked again at the mortgage documents on my desk. They were more than paper. They were my safety net now. If Ethan or Claire tried to push further, I had proof of everything I'd done. The decision had been made. The line had been drawn. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. I spent the next 2 days in my home office, surrounded by stacks of papers, receipts, and old bank statements. Years of financial help that had been scattered in drawers, files, and email folders were now spread across my desk in a neat, deliberate order. Each loan, each transfer, each check I had written. I opened a fresh spreadsheet on my computer, methodically logging each instance of support. The list grew quickly. $1,200 for Ethan's rent in college, $4,500 for the down payment on his car, $8,000 toward the security deposit and furniture for his first apartment with Claire, and of course, the wedding payment, nearly $19,000, hidden beneath the polite label of event deposit. By the time I finished, the total was staggering. Over $60,000 across the years. And that didn't include the small favors, groceries, utilities, emergencies that never quite got repaid. As I reviewed the document, there was no anger in my chest anymore. Just clarity. This wasn't about demanding repayment. It was about making it impossible for Ethan or Claire to deny the truth. To show them, in black and white, that my presence in their lives had always been more than they acknowledged. I scanned and organized the receipts, attaching them to the spreadsheet as proof. It wasn't a threat. It was documentation. That evening, I wrote an email. It was short, calm, and free of any accusations. Ethan, Claire, I've taken some time to review my records, and I wanted to share them with you so we're all clear about the support I've provided over the years. Attached, you'll find a detailed summary of the financial contributions I've made since Ethan was in college, along with supporting documents. I'm not asking for repayment. I just think it's important we all have the same understanding of what's been given and received. I'd like us to talk about this when you're ready. Dad, no demands, no guilt trips, just facts. I hit send, then leaned back in my chair. I could almost picture their faces when they opened it, not because of the total amount, but because of the tone. They would expect anger, accusations, maybe even an ultimatum. But instead, they were getting something far more unsettling. Calm, measured certainty. The twist was simple. I wasn't fighting. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't playing the role they were used to. The silence that followed was telling. For 2 days, I heard nothing. No calls, no texts. On the third day, Ethan finally replied, "Got your email. That's a lot. Let's talk soon." Claire's message came a few hours later. "Hi, Tom. We saw your summary. We appreciate you putting that together. We'll be in touch." Her words were polite, but the subtext was clear. They were rattled, and that was exactly what I wanted. I wasn't threatening them, but I had planted the idea that I could do something with that information. I had shown them that I had been keeping track all along and that I had the proof. As I closed my laptop, I realized this was the first real move I had made that wasn't about reconciliation. This was the first strike, and it wouldn't be the last. The emails had been sent. The silence had lingered, and still there was no real acknowledgement from Ethan or Claire. They were too used to my old pattern. Send money, stay quiet, move on. But this time, I wasn't moving on. I knew I couldn't force them to see what they didn't want to. So instead, I decided to show the truth where it couldn't be ignored. In the place where family reputations are built and tested, the extended family group chat. The group wasn't massive, just a couple dozen members, siblings, cousins, a few close family friends. It was where birthdays were announced, baby pictures shared, and holiday plans coordinated. It was also a place Ethan and Claire were both active. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I typed my message. It was short, measured, and free from emotion. "Hi, everyone. I hope you're all well. I wanted to share something for the sake of transparency and to make sure there are no misunderstandings within the family. Over the years, I've had the privilege of supporting Ethan in different ways: tuition, housing, and more recently, his wedding expenses. I've attached a summary of these contributions, not because I'm asking for anything back, but because I think it's important that everyone understands the support that's been provided. I truly wish Ethan and Claire all the happiness in the world, and I hope we can all continue to support each other in ways that bring our family closer." I attached the same spreadsheet and scanned documents I had sent them privately. Then I hit send. No accusations, no insults, no bitterness. That was the twist. There was nothing in my words they could attack. I wasn't painting myself as a victim, and I wasn't painting them as villains. I was just putting the facts in the open, letting them stand on their own. The reaction came quickly. My phone buzzed nonstop for the next hour. First, my sister replied, "Tom, I had no idea. You've been incredibly generous." That's more than most parents could ever do. Then my cousin chimed in, "Wow, that's real support. Ethan, you're lucky to have a dad like that." Even my younger brother, who rarely got involved in family discussions, sent a message, "Respect, Tom. Not many would do what you've done." No one attacked Ethan or Claire outright, but the tone of the group shifted. The support that had been assumed to be quiet and invisible was now public knowledge. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Neither did Claire, but I noticed something subtle. Both of them stopped posting in the group chat. The silence from their end wasn't anger. It was discomfort. They weren't just ignoring me now. They were avoiding the whole family. That evening, I received a private message from one of Claire's aunts, a woman I barely knew. "Tom, I just want to say, your message today was very gracious. You could have said a lot more, but you kept it respectful. People noticed that. And that was the key. I wasn't just telling the truth. I was controlling the tone. By staying calm and measured, I left them no defense. The facts spoke for themselves, and everyone could draw their own conclusions. The power had shifted, and I knew, deep down, that Ethan and Claire were starting to feel it. The fallout from my message came faster than I expected. By Monday morning, my phone was lighting up with notifications. Some from the family group chat, others from private messages. It wasn't just my siblings or cousins anymore. It was uncles, aunts, even distant relatives who rarely chimed in. They weren't attacking Ethan or Claire directly, but their questions painted a picture Ethan couldn't ignore. "When were you planning to invite your father to the wedding?" one relative asked publicly. "Claire, I saw the photos of the honeymoon. Beautiful place. Did the wedding budget really cover that?" Another cousin commented, a hint of sarcasm creeping in. The silence from Ethan and Claire was deafening. That evening, I got a call from my sister, her voice hushed. "Tom, just so you know, people are talking. A lot. They're not angry with you. They're impressed with how you handled it. But Ethan's getting a lot of questions, and it's uncomfortable for him." I simply nodded, even though she couldn't see it. It's not my goal to embarrass him, but I won't hide the truth either. The next day, Ethan called. His voice was unusually calm, deliberate. "Dad, can we meet? Just us, no one else." I agreed. We set a time at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. When he arrived, I could see the strain in his posture. His eyes darted around as if to make sure no one he knew was nearby. He ordered a coffee, but barely touched it. "Dad," he began, his tone measured, "I wanted to explain about the wedding, the money, everything." I leaned back in my chair, letting him speak. "It wasn't supposed to look like this," he continued. "Claire and I, there were just a lot of moving parts. We didn't invite everyone because we wanted to avoid certain family tensions. And the money, well, things got complicated." His words were careful, almost rehearsed. "Ethan," I said slowly, "this isn't about how it looks. It's about what it is." He sighed, glancing down at his coffee. "Dad, I get that. I do. But the way this is playing out, people are starting to form opinions. Claire's family, my friends, they're asking questions. I don't want this to spiral." And there it was, the twist. This meeting wasn't about clearing the air. It was about damage control. He wasn't here to mend our relationship. He was here to negotiate. to contain the fallout. "Ethan," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I'm not out there telling lies. I haven't attacked you or Claire. All I've done is tell the truth. If that truth makes people uncomfortable, that's not my problem to solve." His jaw tightened. "I just think maybe we could present this differently. Make it look more like we're on the same page. That way, no one loses face." I smiled faintly. "The only way we're on the same page is if you start writing with honesty. I've already done my part." He didn't push further. Instead, he nodded, though I could see the frustration in his eyes. "All right, Dad. I'll talk to Claire. We'll figure out what to do next." As we left the cafe, I realized something important. Ethan wasn't in control of this situation anymore. He was reacting, scrambling, trying to contain the spread of a truth that was now out in the open. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing him. He was coming to me. It didn't take long for the pressure to bear fruit. The quiet tension in the family chat continued, and I knew the conversations happening outside of it were even more pointed. A week after our meeting at the cafe, Ethan called again. His voice was different this time. No rehearsed tone, no strategic pauses, just a tired honesty I hadn't heard from him in years. "Dad," he began, "I need to say this. I'm sorry for the wedding, for the money, for not being upfront. I handled it badly, and I know I hurt you." I let the silence hang for a moment, not to punish him, but to let the words settle. "I appreciate you saying that, Ethan. It's not easy to admit when we're wrong." He exhaled heavily. "Claire's been having a hard time too. People in the family, they're treating her differently now. She's upset. She feels like everyone's against her." I didn't gloat, and I didn't take pleasure in her discomfort, but I also didn't rush to soften the blow. Actions have consequences, and this was theirs to carry. "Ethan," I said evenly, "no one's against her. But trust is earned. It doesn't come from photos or polite messages. It comes from actions." He was quiet for a while before speaking again. "I want us to have a better relationship, Dad. I know I haven't shown it, but I do care. I want to start over." This was the moment that could have gone two ways. The reconciliation he wanted, or the enabling pattern we'd repeated for years. But I had made my decision back in my office when I stacked those mortgage papers neatly on my desk. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady, "I want us to have a better relationship too. But it's not going to look like it used to. I won't be part of your financial safety net anymore. That doesn't mean I'm walking away. It means our connection won't be measured in dollars. It'll be measured in how we show up for each other as people." There was another pause, but this time it wasn't defensive. It was thoughtful. "I understand, Dad," he said quietly. And that was the twist. For the first time, I felt the balance shift entirely. I wasn't cutting him off emotionally, but I was ending the cycle that had kept me powerless. As the weeks went on, the family dynamic changed. Claire remained polite but subdued at gatherings. Her reputation had taken a hit, not because of my words, but because of her own actions. People remembered the photos, the messages, the silence when the truth came out. Ethan, on the other hand, began reaching out more often, not for money, but for conversations. A call about a baseball game, a text about a new job project. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and I realized something important. For the first time in decades, I felt in control of my place in this family. Not because I had won some battle, but because I had finally stopped fighting for the wrong things. In the months after Ethan's apology, life settled into a new rhythm. It was quieter, calmer, free from the tension of constant financial entanglements. For the first time in years, my relationship with my son wasn't defined by transactions. I found myself reflecting often on the lessons this chapter of my life had taught me. I realized something I should have understood a long time ago. Respect can't be bought. It can't be negotiated with checks, deposits, or quiet bailouts. True respect is earned, built slowly through actions and integrity. I had spent years thinking money was a bridge, that if I gave enough, supported enough, sacrificed enough, Ethan would see me not just as his father, but as someone he could rely on emotionally. But money had only blurred the boundaries, creating a relationship that looked close from the outside, but was hollow at its core. By stepping back financially, I had finally given us the chance to rebuild on something more honest. It wasn't easy. There were awkward moments, silences that felt longer than they should, and conversations that tiptoed around old wounds. But there was also progress. Claire remained polite, more reserved than before. She no longer looked at me as a resource to be tapped, but as someone she needed to face with civility. I didn't expect friendship between us, and I didn't need it. What I valued was the absence of pretense. Ethan began to reach out in small, genuine ways. A call about a game he'd watched, a photo of a meal he'd cooked, asking for my old recipe. Little things that seemed insignificant but meant everything because they weren't tied to requests for help. And then, almost a year to the day after the wedding I wasn't invited to, I got a call I didn't expect. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice steady, "we're having a birthday party for Lucas next weekend. His first birthday. I'd really like you to be there." I was silent for a moment, not because I doubted his sincerity, but because I wanted to take in what he was saying. There was no mention of money, no subtext about help or expenses, just an invitation. "I'd be honored," I said finally. That weekend, I walked into their home carrying nothing but a small gift for my grandson, a wooden train set I'd found at a local shop. No large checks, no quiet agreements, just me. When I saw Ethan holding Lucas, I felt something shift. This wasn't the closure I'd once imagined. It was something better, a continuation, built on terms I could live with. As I watched my grandson smash cake in his hands, laughter filling the room, I realized the circle had closed. Not perfectly, not without scars, but in a way that was honest. Family, I had learned, isn't about erasing the past or buying the future. It's about respect, presence, and the willingness to stand in each other's lives without conditions. And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged exactly where I was, without needing to pay my way in.